Hey, and hello, everyone. Welcome to the ComicBase live stream. I am your host, Pete Bickford. I am the creator of ComicBase and a number of other things. But anyway, glad you all could join us here today. We're doing a special show on the live stream. It's less Q&A focused than most, but we are going to try to get to your questions at the end if we possibly can. So go ahead and please post them in the live chat to at ComicBase TV. And if I can't get them this time, I'm going to definitely try to get them on the next show, which should be pretty much an all Q&A extravaganza. But anyway, I would like to say hi to some folks here. And by the way, how's the sound? Is it sound okay, folks? I tried to not deafen folks with the opening music as much as we normally do, but I'm a little worried about the audio levels coming in off StreamYard. So you guys give me a quick thumbs up, thumbs down in the chat. That would help me a lot. Anyway, welcome to Jetsy Comics out here from Ording, Washington. You're first up here. Quebec, Canada is being represented by Andre. Oro from Minneapolis, of course. And, well, minus 13 you're looking forward to by Sunday night. I don't miss those days whatsoever. Tim Kilbreth, glad you could join us from William-Baco, Illinois. Robbie from Toledo. Fred Slota at Billiat. Larry's Library is here. Larry, by the way, did a quite nice kind of compare contrast with ComicBase and some other software recently. Please check out his webpage if you can. I believe it's Larry's Library. But I think that was very nice. And Southern Indiana, our mod is in the house from rainy in the low 40s. Oh yes, that's right. We have Groundhog Day coming up. I forgot all about that. But all right, well, cool, guys. Oh wow, things are moving. Thumbs up. Okay, sound is good. Sweet, excellent. All right, and Mod says, "Dude, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." All right, guys. Well, like I said, the show this today is going to be largely focused on comic valuations. We're going to handle the basics real quick. So for anyone who just dropped by and said, "How the heck do I find out what my comics are worth?" We'll try to get you your answer in about 6 or 7 minutes, followed by a lot of more complicated thoughts on the subject as we go, and we'll take it from there. But let's get down to business and see how it goes. Let's see if this title sting works. Oh, not the right one, but let's try it anyway. All right, hang on a second. Just a second. Come on. Oh, technical problems. Where would we be without them? All right, I think we got it here. All right, so let's get down to the basics. So, how does ComicBase determine your actual market value? Because, I mean, that's really kind of where it all starts, right? So, getting your values out of ComicBase, it's pretty simple. ComicBase comes built in with what we think are the market values of, at this point, over 1.1 million comic books, as well as a couple million books, magazines, and newspapers. And the way we get the values, we've done the story before, but it bears repeating, is every month, courtesy of our friends at Atomic Avenue and Heritage Auction Galleries, we chew on the actual market prices for about 2.1, sometimes 2.2 million values of comic books and other items that are either on the market or have just sold in the last 30 days. And what we do is we take basically the listings, starting with whatever the current guide price is. We take anything that's actually, for sale as a vote for that price. So, if we have the current guide value of a particular item is say $5 and someone put theirs up as $6, at that point you've got to vote for $6. And that will tend, all things considered, to give it a nudge towards $6. Against that, we also have prices of items that have actually sold. Now, those ones are considered quite authoritative, and we consider those as more of a shove towards the price of whatever the sale price was. The difference on that one, though, is that even though it has a fairly pronounced effect on the price, so for instance, if we thought it was going for $5 and it really turned out that it sold for $2.75, that is a much more powerful vote. So we've got a suggestion of $6 from the guy who has one for sale, and we've got one that actually sold at $2.75. You're going to wind up finding out that the price very quickly moves to a number like $3.50 or $3.75. Now, that being said, the sold price only has an effect for a very limited period of time because things change, right? The fact that something sold 2 years ago doesn't mean that you're going to sell it for that price now. So it's a very narrow window that the sold prices count for, whereas the people who have it for sale, their vote is out there for as long as the item's for sale. Now, with that said, We don't want to make it possible so that one crazy guy can sit there and say, "Well, I think this $5 item is worth $5,000." You don't then average the $5 price with the $5,000 price and say, "Well, clearly the true market value is about $2,500." No, you throw out the crazy guy because the number's so wildly out of proportion that it doesn't bear consideration. It's a typo. It's weird noise in the system, unless there's a bunch of them like that. So if enough people, depending on the order of magnitude of the price change, both positive and negative, depending on how far you want to push it, we have a certain thresholds you have to meet for the vote to be counted at all. But we do need to, be ready for that day when suddenly that comic book that was sitting there in the dollar bin for the last 28 years gets optioned for the hot new Marvel movie. At which point, that suddenly that dollar comic book very well could become a $50 comic book or a $38 comic book or whatever the deal is. So we'll take it, but only if there's a fair number of people who are also listing it that way, and also because prices go both up and down. The if there are certain weird swings in the market, sometimes the movie gets optioned, then they decide not to make it, and then you will see that people will start dumping their copies, and the price will swing back down. But in all these cases, we're grinding market data, and the answer to weird pricing is always just more data. It tends to move the price right back to where it was, before the weird data got introduced. So you can get weird fluctuations in the market. So, for instance, you can have someone who just, I don't know, really, really had to have the 17th appearance of Rocket Raccoon and was willing to pay $50 for it. That could enter the stream. But if it turns out he's the only guy, that price is quickly going to fall back to whatever the normal price would be. Um, every once in a while, as I mentioned, there's 1.1 million comic books alone in the database. Things get weird and they stay a little weird. At which point, we have a secondary mechanism which is called request price correction. At which point, just I don't know. Let's say there's a cartel of people with Beetle Bailey number 47 who have all decided at once that we're going to make this into a $4,000 comic book. And they somehow get it so it's above that threshold, or it's just say somebody buys a poor condition copy for a ridiculous price, or the reverse. They somehow manage to snag a near mint copy for the deal of the century. Yes, that's going to swing the price, and it might stick there for a while unless there's more market data that comes along and corrects it. Every once in a great while, something like that happens. At which point, you can highlight the book in question and say, "Man, this just looks wrong," and say request price correction, and then that will send the note right to our editors. We ask that you give us a source which is not some other price guide, for why you believe that the price, is out. We don't want to hear that, joescomics.com thinks it's worth $1 jillion and you have it at $7.99. What's wrong with you, comic-based guys? No, we want to hear that, well, I'm just checking eBay and, 3 copies just sold for $58 or whatever the thing is. We want to hear that there's something in the actual market that justifies the price change. But if we do that, then our folks will review all the available pricing data that they can find on the whole thing, and they'll make a manual correction. But that's how the data gets set, and it's the vast majority of prices in the whole thing are not done as any kind of price guide. We're literally just doing a rolling average of the comics on the market. All right, now a little bit of fine point around that one, and I didn't have a separate title for this one, but pay close attention in your copy of ComicBase to the setup grading. And in there, you'll see that there's a list of percentages that we break down from the near mint to very fine, fine, good, very good, etc. What the average percentages are for the different grades. And that's going to play a big factor in things. But we're going to get to that in a little bit. I'm going to kick on to the next title, though, and I want to just have a brief digression into some terms that people always ask us about. So let's see if we can get this to happen. Holy cow. My goodness, those titles actually worked. All right. Yeah, whoa, except I hit the wrong camera after that. All right. But anyway, so yes, this is the worst produced show on the internet. I'm up for some kind of Webby award for that, and I'm hoping to get it this time. I can't believe whoever worst category. I don't whoever clinched me out last time. I'm gonna give him a run for it. Anyway, let's get back to the question we always get, which is, hey, look, I see a value year 2023. I see a price. I see a cost. What the heck are you guys on about? And it's important to know what those three terms are. So cost is very simply, what did you pay for the comic book? Now the costs all default to zero. You can, if you want, in the preferences, you can say, hey, I typically buy my books for 85% of cover price, or I buy cover price, or I buy them all at this comic store, and I always pay current market. Whatever your deal is, you can have them default to anything you like. But unless you tell us what you paid for a book, we obviously have no way of knowing. And if you don't care what your cost was, then don't worry about it. You don't need to ever fill that in. But if you're wondering what the cost field is, it's what you paid. Beyond that, you've got the idea of value. Now, if you have the express version or the free version of ComicBase, you're only going to see the value for the current year, 2023. If you have other versions, Pro, Archive, so forth, you're going to see value for not just the current year, but the last 4 years. So you can get an idea right in the program of how the price curve is playing out. So what we'll do in that value is the idea of what would a theoretical near mint copy of this comic book go for, and we'll figure out what your very fine copy will go for by multiplying the number in the grading setup by, I believe it's 0.66, to get the very fine value. If it's good, it's 0.20, it's and so on and so forth. And you also can have different breakdowns for CGC and so forth. We'll cover that all in massive detail in some other show because, man, we've beaten that one to death last year. But anyway, so that's what we're doing. That's what we think the theoretical, value of the book is. And that's based on the rolling averages of similar books that have sold. Now, beyond that, you've got the idea of price. Now, price is what you want to charge for the book if you were ever to put it up for sale. Now, for most people, if we're not, in the market to sell books right at the moment, if we just want to have an idea for what our book's worth, when you update, you're given an option. Do you want to set the prices of all your books to be equal to their current values? And the default is, yeah, go ahead and do that. But you can say, no, I want to price my books separately, or do whatever you like. You don't need to go with you don't need to price your books the way that we think our values are. Matter of fact, you don't even need to update your values at all. But, most people do. In which case, your price would be the same as your value pretty much. All right. The pretty much part comes in at that the price is rounded to what we consider sensible numbers. What's a sensible number? So let's say we've got a $1 comic book, and I've got it in very fine condition. Now, as we were saying beforehand, the multiplier you give for to get from near mint to very fine would be 0.66. It's 2/3, right? No one on the planet who's not crazy is going to price a comic book in a store at 66 cents. So based on the fact that it's basically $1 comic book, we would then suggest that the price be 65 cents. Now the value is computed down to the 17th decimal. Well, it's actually more like the 7th decimal, but it's computed down as far as we know how to do it. The price, on the other hand, is going to be the sum of all your actual sale prices, and there's going to be a little bit of rounding involved in that by default. Now you can, of course, force them to be exactly the same to the penny. But it's kind of weird. I mean, you got a very fine comic book that's $100. I mean, are you really going to price for $66? Or are you going to be at 65 or 70? It's just it's just strange. Anyway, but yes, there's a progressive rounding algorithm we use that makes those two prices occasionally a little bit different from each other. So just be aware that that's going on. All right, let me see. I got a question through this from our moderator. He says, I get that for ComicBase and the DB, they're underpriced. It's helpful to point to actual sales info to bring up the DB valuation. But what about situations where the user believes the relatively uncommon or obscure item that has low demand is overvalued in the database? Same thing applies. If the item's obscure, there won't be any sales to point out. But that doesn't mean the DB valuation is correct. It's I mean, we get these arguments with literally, there's no limit to the comic book value arguments you could have. Matter of fact, I consider just as a joke, except I couldn't find a way to make it funny, of making this the world's shortest broadcast of saying, all right, so what is my collection's value? And it would have a single title slide. We would just come and say, hi, welcome to the show. We're going to answer the question of what's my collection's value, and to have a single title slide which says whatever you can sell it for. And then roll credits, we're done. It was a funnier idea in my head than I knew it would be in person. But there's a lot of truth to that. And we're going to get into some of the fine points of sales in I want to handle like the basics here first, and but then I want to get into some of the more complicated areas of this one later on for the folks who want to stick around longer. But I do want to hit that one later on, and we'll hit that question as what in detail. All right, so we hit price, value, and so forth. Let's get on to the next point here. We're almost done with the basics, and that is all right. How do I see the total value of my collection? First question we get from pretty much everyone. Well, once you're in ComicBase, the easiest way to go and find out, well, what's it worth, right? And honestly, I suggest if you've just gotten ComicBase as a Christmas present or you're getting started on a big collection, I would say do this all the time, because it's just going to be good for your own, morale as you take on the price, the time it requires to, inventory a collection of any size. Is go to your file menu, go to collection statistics, and unfortunately I have it. Well, let me see if I can pull it up here. I can do this. Sorry, I got to switch over to another computer I wasn't planning on using today. All right, and let me go put this on another screen that from across the room. Sorry, this was going to be so slick, but all right, we'll get to there. All right, so let's bounce over here and put myself on camera here so we can see what I'm doing. All right, so this, for instance, this is my collection as of this morning. And so if you go to File menu, go to Collection Statistics over here, or F12. It's going to grind for a while. It's going to see if you've got the most updated pricing and so forth and that. And if you ever get a note saying, hey, your subscription's about to expire, did you want to renew it? Say yes. It's a good thing. I did not download last night's update yet because I was doing other things. But here's my collection right here. And this is the quick bottom line of what I've got. Now, because I was looking at comic books last time, it's coming up to my comic book section. You also can dial in your entire collection, your books, your magazines, your newspapers, etc. If I just want to see my entire collection, it's somewhat more. But let's go back to my comic books. And if you look on the right here, this is what I've got in comics. The average value, I tend not to put in my cost. So these numbers are highly specious. You'll notice that the asking price, if you can see it, is slightly different, but largely by small amounts. And then that's in theory what my markup would be if I made it over my asking. And you can print this out. Honestly, this is the report that we get asked for more than any other. For insurance purposes, unless you have a very valuable collection, this typically is all your insurance agent will want, because otherwise it's very easy to bury him in paper. Just go ahead and hit print, and that typically would be the value of your rider. Now, if you do have a very expensive collection, they may ask you for other things, at which point they may want a collection report or one of the other reports in ComicBase, but those are pretty easy to get as well. Some people say, we have a customer with a multi-millionaire comic book collection. They said, hey, give me the list of your top 300 books, in which case you just go to your my most valuable items report and print that off, and that was what he used. But this bottom line is what my comic collection is worth as of this morning. It goes up and down every week based on how much I've sold, how much I've bought, and the average market. But that's pretty much how you keep track of things. And honestly, it's not a bad idea, like I say, to try to kind of keep that rolling. As you go about inventory your collection the first time. It helps my world a lot. If I've just spent 2 hours entering comics, because I just put in 3-4 boxes at once, and it's tedious as all get out. I mean, it doesn't matter how quick the barcode scanner is, just hauling boxes around and flipping through stuff like that. It's just it's not the most fun you'll ever have with your collection. I'm not going to kid you about that. But on the other hand, if you then hit F12 and say, oh hey, I just entered 30,000 bucks worth of stuff, it does my morale a world of good. So I would suggest try it if you're, getting your collection rolling for the first time, and we'll take it from there. All right. Let's see here. Hey, I'm getting static from the administrator. Didn't get Sidekick to download the new update? No, because I'm running in debug mode half the time because I'm the dang developer. All right, all right. So let's get on to some of the more interesting parts here. So look, if you tuned in just to say how do I evaluate my collection, it basically is put your collection in ComicBase, make sure you've got the most recent updates, and hit F12, and you will know what your collection is worth as best as we can determine by grabbing as much market data as we can get our hands on, which is a fairly staggering amount from month to month. But with that said, let's get on to some of the finer points of this whole thing. And Sophia said, "Hi, what is the app?" Uh, if you're thinking of the app that comes with ComicBase, it'd be ComicBase Mobile on the App Store that works with the Pro and Archive editions of the thing. Or if you're just here and asking about it, ComicBase is the program we're all talking about. So anyway, Sophia, welcome to the show. All right, let's move on to other things. So let's get on to the things that aren't the basics. And oh, unfortunately, I guess switch my source back to the super source here. Dang it. All right. So let's go and let's see. All right. So we got the thing of value of your collection. All right. That's the button I wanted. All right, number one tip: accurate grading is the whole game. I mean, it's not just part of the game; it's the whole game. So I can't overstate this enough. In my one of my big tips for the new year, I said, look, number one tip for 2023 how to make life better is grade once and do it right. Learn to use the grading wizard in ComicBase. I'll do a quick demo on it here if you haven't seen it before. But whenever you go to a particular book and you're not sure what the grade is, if you go ahead and just double click on the book so it brings up its edit window, and then right over by where the condition is, there's a little question mark. Hit the question mark, and it's going to quiz you on all the things that may be right or wrong with the book. So if you sit there and say things like, "Look at tears," I've got a moderate staple tear over here that's a quarter inch or less. It immediately says, "Well, that's going to be we went from near mint right down to fine. Why? Because that's staple tear." I say, "Well, I've got some my spine is I've got some mild roll that also qualifies as fine." But let's say, I've got some torn pages. Small tears don't move the grade at all. Let's say I've got big tears, still fine. Strangely enough, man, we really value that cover. But say I've got pages that are just, basically ripped in half. 2 inch, things. At that point, suddenly I bump the grade down to good. But this will tell you what the grade of the comic book is. It does it according to Overstreet grading standards. That is the industry standard. Anyone who's doing it differently than that, as far as I'm concerned, is doing it wrong. But hit the grading wizard over on that one, and that will it'll help you get used to the idea of how to grade the book. But do that until you are good at grading, so you've kind of got all the different breakpoints memorized, and that's going to really, really help you in life. So yeah, just the breakdowns in value between a near mint book, like I say, and a very fine book. So I mean, what do we mean by near mint? Right? Near mint means it looks like it just was sitting on the newsstand and no everyone treated it nicely, right? They didn't necessarily, wear film handling gloves the entire time they dealt with it. It is not necessarily the most perfectly printed example of the printer's art, the most beautiful centering, the most, thing that has ever happened. But it means it's a perfectly good, brand new looking comic book with no, basically no defects of any note. That's what near mint means. Mint is this insane standard that really does mean it's the perfect example of printer's art, and no one has ever, touched it with anything but a virgin's kiss, and an ray of sunshine and things like that. But anyway, basically, the short version of mint is perfect in every way. Never put your books that way unless you're willing to swear on to a judge that they really are that perfect, because it's just not, yeah, it's not a normal standard. People do not put your books in as mint if you don't know what the grade is. That's not what mint means these days. Ironically, in 1975 or so, the first time I saw Overstreet price guide, that's what mint did mean, but then they changed. Anyway, it hasn't been that way for a long time, so don't do it. But anyway, but going from near mint, which is like kind of like your default grade for every book that's been treated well and is you're sitting there, you bought off the newsstand. The difference between that and very fine is it's the difference of a quarter inch non-color breaking bend in the upper right hand corner of the of the cover. Just the tiniest little defect like that. It's a nick. In the color along the edge, or a stress marks along the spine will dump it from near mint to very fine. It's a tiny amount of wear will get you there. So, and the price you'll pay, when you go by the averages, is you'll have just lost a third of the value of the comic. When you get to more significant things, when suddenly it's a color breaking bend and not a non-color breaking one, or you've got a collection of scuffs along the spine, it's pretty easy to get down to Fine. Now, Fine is still a perfectly good book. Back in the day, we could have sold it, but these days, you've now lost 2/3 of the value of the comic book. So yeah, no, you got to take this seriously. So do not fudge the idea of the grade. Don't undergrade either. I mean, don't, unless you really are feeling very generous. You know, uh, be aware that this is a huge value swing, of not getting the condition exactly right. So do take the time, do learn how to do it, but do it once, because you're just not going to have the patience to come back a second time in your collection and do it all again. But yeah, no, I mean, just what to civilians look like tiny differences in how damaged the comic book is. I always get this call from people who say, I got my brother's comic books. He's had them for 50 years. I'm thinking, 50-year-old comic book collection. That sounds, that's starting to get, a little sexy. But they said, yeah, he took really good care of them and everything. And they all look mint. And at that point, my heart just sinks, because I know I'm going to have to repeat the same talk I just gave right now. So, all right, yeah, I know they look good, and this is a lot to be excited about, and there's probably a real decent amount of value there. But don't get carried away, because man, collectors care whether it's very fine or near mint or very good or whatever else. And man, is it going to change the value. So get the value right, learn how to do it right, and do it once. Don't have to do it again. This doesn't mean you're going to send your books on to get professionally graded. That's a whole different racket. Emphasis on racket. But when you are doing your collection, take the time, get that part right. All right, moving on. All right, these are selling tips. All right, and this is where we get into like the theoretical mode of things. The difference between I have comics and I have these comics is night and day. It's next to condition. It's the thing that's going to make the most difference in your life as far as whether you get top dollar for the books. All right. So what do I mean by I have comics versus I have these comics? All right. Let's go from the let's go from the top down. All right. Well, let's go from the bottom up. All right. If I say I have 6 pallets worth of comics, they're for sale. Then I used to do a lot of business with people who were in the bulk comic business, which, if you own comics and love comic books, is not a business you want to be in. Because at that point, what they do is they say, 6 pallets of comics. What's the total, what's the tear weight? So if I take these things off the pallets and I just stick them on a great freight scale, what's the weight? And then they'll get a number. It's like, well, it's 583 pounds. And then they'll say, okay, yeah, $1.20 a pound. I'll offer you $600 for them all, right? This is your worst nightmare if you have comics that are worth a damn. Now, if you're cleaning up an old warehouse, well, then that's the world you live in. You say, I have comics. And someone will say, all right, $600 for 580 pounds of comic books. That sounds good. I'll look through them, and maybe we'll get lucky with a few of them, and we'll pull those out, and then we'll sell the rest, to the next guy bulk along the way. And, there is markets like this. I mean, this is how like bulk DVDs work. If you ever look at the $3 bin, or if you're ever like a gas station in the Mojave Desert and they've got a bin full of DVDs for the truckers, they're all $2 each. At some point, these were all movies that someone cared about, except through a succession of resellers and wholesalers and bulk traders and things like that. Yeah, these things suddenly all these movies suddenly got dumped into the $2 bin for truckers to listen to in their cabs on lonely nights working across the desert or whatever they're doing. Yeah, I mean, there's markets like this for everything, for books, for clothes, for DVDs, movies, you name it. There's a point where it just becomes stuff. You don't want to be stuff. So the difference between saying, okay, I have comics, right? So now we're at like $1.20 a pound. Let's say I go a little better and I say, I have 46,000 comics. Okay, this tells me a number of things. The mere fact that I've counted the comic books. All right, so especially if you give me an idea of how big the pile is, I will know, first of all, that these are single issues or that they're trade paperbacks. That's going to make an immense difference to me. It's going to tell me the number of issues. It'll tell me that someone actually bothered to count. I can go a few steps up that will add a great deal more value. For instance, everyone's next question, as soon as they know that you have individual comic books, will be like, when are they from? right? And if you sit there and say, "Oh yeah, just all over," right? Well, the average price of an all over comic book, if you just took all the comics in ComicBase and you divided them out, it's about, if I don't know anything else, you guesstimate 455 bucks. It's risen with inflation over the course of the years. But if I just know that you have comics and I want to guess how many, what your collection's worth, say I have 1,000 comics. What condition are they in? Oh, they're all near mint. And let's say I believe you. All right. Well, suddenly now I know I'm looking at something with an estimated value of say $4,000, right? Um, I'm doing a lot better than 4,000 comic books just in gross weight is worth a fraction of that, a sixth of that maybe. But as soon as I know that, all right, so now there are comics in near mint from the current era, we got that. All right, but then something magical happens when you go and you add more information to it. Let's say I know that, for instance, that they're not from the current era; they're from the 1970s. Well, now I'm not guessing $4 or $5 a comic book anymore. An average near mint comic book from the 1970s, now I'm thinking more like $15, $20, depending it goes. And if I see it from the 60s, I'm going to multiply that figure by another three or four, all the way back to the 40s, where at some point, if I said I have, a 1,000 near mint copy, comics from the 40s, at that point, most comic collectors will want to drop the phone because their mouth will be drooling so much and they're having a heart attack. And they're like, how do I get to your house to buy them from you now? It's like, it gets psychotic when you know more about them. Now, it gets even better when you've got a list of what the actual books are. We sit there and say, okay, I have 1,000 Batman comics from the 70s to the 90s. Okay, all right, now I'm getting an idea for what the collection is, and the estimate I'm giving you for how much they're worth is moving steadily upward. All right, so I said Batman, I said 70s, nice. So everyone's thinking, okay, a widely collected comic book that I can probably move on the secondary market. If I'm, Batman is the hottest character probably in the world as a property right now. Probably I'd say neck and neck with Spider-Man, but probably I'd give the nod to Batman just at the current moment. Um, and you're also at that point rehearsing in your head a list of all the hot runs of Batman. Now, there was a lot of junk between the 70s and 90s, but there were a lot of times where like, some of those issues are worth bank. Now, when you get really good, you'll say, all right, I have Batman number 438 in VF condition. Now we're not talking about comics anymore. We're not talking about bulk anything. We're not talking about ranges of anything. We're talking about Batman 438. And now I've got an exact price for that thing. And better yet, if I can sell it to someone who's looking for not not just comics, not just modern comics, not just single floppy comic books, not just comics from the 90s, not just Batman comics, but if I can sell it to someone who's looking for Batman 438, then the price you're going to get in ComicBase is going to be bang on, or it's going to be as close to as you're ever going to see. Um, because that's what we're pricing as. I mean, if you look at the actual price point in ComicBase, that's not the price for comics, it's price for someone who wanted that comic. So, let's flip over to my collection again here. I just happened to sell these after years. I mean, this is a Fantagraphics series. It was stored in such an odd place in my house that I had to look at the size of it just to know what it was, just so I could find the darn thing. That's what a pain this thing was for me. But this is a square boundish thing. It doesn't fit nicely into any box I've got. So in our old offices, it had been up on a bookshelf with other similarly oddly sized things. And in where they're at right now, they were in the worst place I could ever put them, which is like the back spare bedroom, not particularly well organized. And so instead of my usual 30 seconds to find anything in my collection, suddenly I'm spending 10 minutes looking for these darn things. But to my great delight, after 15 years in my collection, because I acquire things personally because I have to have them for comic bases. The vast majority of why things are in my collection. We buy one of everything. But I just sold a bunch of Mome graphic novels from Fantagraphics circa 2005. And they ran $14.95, 14.50. Now, why was it 14.50? Is there a huge demand for Mome number one? No, I may have been the only copy of Mome number one that sold in the world this month. It's not something that the world is particularly beating down the door for, but there was someone who wanted that, who'd read other things of the series, maybe knew the artist or else, who didn't have the issue and wanted to know the end of the story. And so I was able to, sell this to the guy as Mome number one. If I sold it as a Fantagraphic graphic novel, $5 maybe would have been the price. If I sold it as a comic book from 2005, $2, $3 might have been the bulk price. But because I sold it as Mome number one, I got full market value. And that's where you want to be with everything you want to do. You want to sell particular comic books. You want to sell not just, some comics, you want to sell these comic books. And it's all about finding the buyer who wants that. All right, let's get back to it. So next up we have, apparently we need to switch the whole thing. Let's switch over the super source. There we are. Okay, nope. Sorry, I set up new macros on here, guys. I'm going to get this. All right, this is my great segue into when you sell, do you want to sell fast and low, or do you want to sell high and slow? What the heck does Bickford mean by that? Well, it's, at a certain point, you got to make a decision of, the value in your collection, the value in ComicBase, as near as we can determine it, is the price for someone who's looking for that comic book, right? Again, it's not looking for generic stuff and so forth. And they may not want, just because they want your Batman doesn't mean that they want your Daredevils. They might not want your collection of Momes. But if you're selling to someone who wants, each particular book, ComicBase is going to give you an excellent price where it's going to be you're going to get, as they say, top dollar in the market. But one thing that you're going to trade on this one, and everyone who's ever sold comic books or dealt with comic books, or frankly any collectible knows, is finding the person who loves that thing for what it is a slow going game. It takes a while. Now there's great, things out there in the world now that we never had when I was a kid. I mean, you can post your books on Atomic Avenue and suddenly the entire world who's looking for Mome number one can say, oh, hey, look, finally a copy of Mome number one came up for sale. There's some guy in Tennessee who has it. And then suddenly I get an order. Now, beforehand, before the internet, before things like that, if I had a copy of Mome number one, my best choices were to either haul it to infinity comic book shows and hope somebody had an interest, although the odds were not great. I could open a comic store and let it sit there for 17 years and wait for the guy to walk in my door who really wanted Mome number one. Again, the odds are not great, but or you could do other things where you sell it again, not as Mome number one, as, hey, I have a bunch of Fantagraphic graphic novels here. I'll sell the whole box of them to you for $50. That would move quick, but you would move for a lower price. So going back to the original title, it's like, okay, do you want to go high and slow? Do you want to get full market value for your books? High value, but at the price of taking longer to sell them, or do you want to blow them out fast and get the money and go home? In which case, be prepared right away to sacrifice the dollar amount that you're looking for on those. If I had just inherited, let's say I'm not a comic book collector, I don't love comics, I didn't just spend my entire lifetime in the field of comic books, and I had just suddenly had a bunch of comic books dumped on me in some kind of inheritance or divorce or something else like that. And so now I'm like, okay, great. My garage is now full of 50 boxes of comic books. And let's say I've taken that Bickford guy's advice and I've actually inventoried them. So now I have a list of all the stuff. And let's just say, I don't know, sake of argument, the ComicBase says, yeah, they're worth $212,000. All right. Now, if I've got enough time, I post them on Atomic Avenue, I wait, and I fill orders day after day, and it whittles the collection down, and eventually I sell $212,000 worth of stuff, and I'm happy, except that it took me forever. If I want to move them out faster, I've got to do some kind of other thing. I could bundle them up in sets. I could sell them a collection as a bulk deal, or I could literally just post an ad in Craigslist and say, "Hey, I just inherited my my ex-husband's comics. I hate him. I hate Daredevil. I hate comics. I never want to see a four-color thing again. Whatever my deal is." And the first guy who walks over here with a moving van gets them. At which point, some guy with a moving van will walk over, hand you $500, and your comics will be gone. It will be gone that day. That's great for you. Great for the guy with the moving van, probably. But you will get rid of them fast, but you will get rid of them for a tiny fraction of what you'd want. Now, there's a variety of other ways to go on this whole thing. And what I typically advise people that I like is, if you've got a certain amount of time, Now, you don't want to keep the comics forever, but what I would typically do is I would, you know how triage goes, but I would segment the comic books by their value and their worth, and basically get the most value for the ones I can move quickly, selling them to, as individual items. And then as time went on, I would then progressively bulk them up, and sell them out, part them out as needed in order to clear the collection as I go. But my first step would be, number one, get everything inventoried. Again, accurate grading, very solid. I know where everything is, and I've organized it in a way so I can get to individual books as I go. Maybe I even went and I said, if is I'm going through ComicBase, anything that pops up that's worth $500 or more, maybe I put it off in a special pile, and maybe I play a secondary game where I get it slabbed, and then I do that one on that market. At that point, my typical advice would be, okay, look, if your collection, it's all entered in, if it qualifies, first of all, first thing I do is go under the internet menu in ComicBase and say request collection evaluation, which then does a quick scrub through the data and says, is this the kind of collection that heritage auction galleries would be interested in? We use heritage because they're the big guy in the industry. They can, I don't have this kind of collection, but if you have the kind of collection they're interested in, they only play with high end stuff. Honestly, I think it annoys them whenever they touch anything that's worth less than $500. I mean, like, really, yeah. But if you've got the kind of collection that they're interested in, and this will do a quick statistical thing, this will then forward on a précis of the collection to the acquisitions guy over at Heritage Auctions, and he will just, if it's the sort of thing he wants, he will immediately call you on the phone, and if they need to, they'll get a guy on the plane by the end of the week to come look at your stuff. Again, I do not have that kind of collection, but several of you folks out in the viewing audience do. I know of at least, I think, 4, maybe 5 current copies of Action Comics #1 amongst the comic based people that I know personally. So yeah, no, there's people out there with some real money. But if you've got that kind of collection and you want to clear it, start with the auction gallery guys, because if they can hit it at that point, you might be in kind of you might be in a rarefied part of the industry that goes beyond even what you'd see as a list price, depending on how rare and wonderful the item is. But that's when jackpots can happen. Beyond that, secondarily, I'd say, okay, um, take everything that's left that didn't move at an auction gallery, and I'd say post it to Atomic Avenue. It's the easiest thing to do. If you want to post to eBay or some other system, go ahead and do that. But let it ride at retail price for as long as you've got the patience to deal with it. Which is to say, again, it depends on, how much you hated the guy who gifted you the collections, how much comics annoy you, how much the whole thing just makes you nuts, or whatever. You just, maybe you don't like filling orders. But if you've got any patience for that at all, you have almost nothing to lose by saying, hey, look, let everyone who's looking for MOM #1 find it. Because at that point, I get full retail, and full retail is hard to beat on these things. There will be people who want to immediately scoop out everything that's been on your wish list if you post to Atomic Avenue. It's if you're posting rarish things, it'll automatically immediately trigger people's wish lists, and then overnight people have gotten 100 orders off things, depending on what sorts of things you're posting. I mean, I'll just tell you, if you've got any kind of high end or even mid end or even low end, gold, silver, and even Bronze Age stuff, that stuff moves. So don't be surprised if that stuff moves fairly quickly. So a month or two spent moving that stuff out will do a lot of it will realize most of the value of what you've got going on there. It might not be the most majority of the collection, but the hot stuff will move and you'll get full price for it. So, take it. At that point, then I would then start taking what's left, taking the price list, shopping it around to different comic retailers, and saying, "Hey, I've got $56,000 worth of other stuff. Here's the era. Here's the exact list of stuff and the conditions it's in. Make me an offer." Now, if they make you an offer that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 cents on the dollar, don't be insulted. That's their business. They got to sell it for less than they paid. That's part of being a retailer, or being in the comics market. But then remember, they're also playing the same game you are in terms of they're trading their time and their ability to market product for the money that they'll pay. So if they say, "Look, I'll drive a van over tomorrow and we'll cut you a check," and they want to pay you 20 cents on the dollar for it, consider it. It's not an insult. I mean, there will be people who try to rip you off, but if you have got a list with of everything you've got and it's accurate, you're not going to get hosed. I mean, it won't be one of those things where like someone says, "Well, you got the Hulk 180. That's worth a couple of bucks. I guess you got the 181 and the 182. I don't know, just a bunch of junk after it. I'll give you $5 for all three." That stuff won't happen. And if you guys are in the audience, you know what I'm talking about. And by the way, if you've ever done that to someone in a garage sale, shame on you. Anyway, but yeah, do that, and then progressively, as you get to the end of it, and it's just the more undesirable things like that. Yeah, go ahead and bulk them out and sell them to sell them. If you have to sell them as pound, just to clear your life, and you want them gone, do it. It's there's not. I mean, things are only worth what they're worth to you. So, at the end, realize them stuff that's quick, to get, take the easy money and then get rid of it. I don't There's an alternate point of view on this one, which I've heard, and I don't understand it. But I'll put it out there. There's a guy I knew who was liquidating a shop with 25,000 comics. He'd been in business from the 70s to the 90s. And his whole, I bought a video game off him, like one of those stand-up video games. I think it was a Spy Hunter. And I said, "Wow, you have a lot of comic books in your back." "Yeah, yeah, ran a comic shop, 70s and 90s. "How many comics you got?" About 25,000. "Do you know what you got?" There's some great stuff, there's some bad stuff. I never inventoried it, but I only want to sell the whole collection at once." And I'm like, I don't understand that point of view. I mean, I just don't. The guy would be taking such a bath in terms of how much money I mean, had he simply just hired two teenagers for a couple weeks to inventory the collection, he would have effectively times five or 10 the value of his collection he could have gotten out of the whole thing. Instead, it was going to rot away his garage till he sold his house. Oi. Anyway, all right. Enough of the good advice. Let's push on to the next. All right. Unique equals you're on your own. All right. Here's where I gotta be honest about the good and the bad of doing a price guide. Now, so again, I get a little fuzzy about funny about this because I'm like, we haven't been a price guide for many, many years with ComicBase. Not since the late 90s, I think, when we were partnered with Comics Buyer's Guide, where we all tried our best to, take our expert opinion with, 50 years of experience in the industry and try to say, all right, do we think that Roy Rogers is hotter than Dale Evans this year in the four-color comics market? And how much of a bump do they deserve this year? And we would repeat that process for 110,000 comic books. It was crazy making. Um, but beyond that, it's we haven't done that forever. The price guides, such as they are, I think are largely, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who pays attention anymore. I mean, once it was kind of an interesting thing, but these days, if you got the ability to have market data and just steer off of market data, I will take that every time. Off of, well, Joe's been in the industry for 50 years and he thinks that this comic ought to go for that. And I say, well, that's great that Joe thinks that. And he might even be right, but I'm going to go to the latest auction listing and see what it did sell for, and then I'll have a better idea. I mean, do you want the guide price on your current stock portfolio? What some Wall Street guy thinks it might go for? Or do you want to know what it sold for 13 minutes ago? I personally want the latter. It's interesting whether people think things are going up or down, but in terms of like what's it worth right now, yeah, I'm going to take sales every time. Anyway, so we haven't been in that business anymore so much, but you got to realize what the limits of the business we're in are. In that, if this is a one of a kind comic book, like if we've never seen a sale of anything like it, and this gets back to Greg's original point. So let's imagine there was a obscure 1970s underground comic. I'm just gonna say, all right, so Cheech Lizard. There was an let's. I'm just gonna say that there was an unknown follow up series to it. Cover price buck 25, sold by Von Bode on the streets of San Francisco way back in the day. Actually, I think he's from Utica, New York. Stole in the streets of Utica, New York, back in the day. Now, it could be that the last time this thing ever changed hands, it went for $3. There was a long, long period of time between the 80s and the early, almost 2000, where undergrounds just no one gave a crap. Sorry for the language, guys. But I mean, underground comic books, I mean, the hippies who love them so much already, they either had them or they just weren't that interested. The new kids were busy, paying attention to Spider-Man and McFarlane and the Image stuff and everything else that's going on. But undergrounds just weren't moving very well, except in a couple of shops. And then everything changed, and suddenly, I mean, I bought a large underground collection where I think, I paid 30 cents a book, for, thousands of comic books like this, and full of undergrounds and things like that from the 70s and the 80s, and I thought I was being aggressive pricing them up to 3 or $5 at the time, and they sat there forever, but then when they got hot, dang, they got hot, and now these things go for $1 jillion. It's all about, again, you have to find the people who know about them and who care enough to say it's worth that. So, yeah, I mean, so if you've got, like, and I think at one point I did have a copy of Cheech Wizard, which was a, early drug crazed effort from Mr. Von Bodie, which you will hear so much more about in a future podcast. Um, for the name alone, it's nothing particular, but it's the sort of thing that, yeah, it didn't appeal to most collectors at the time, but there are people who are like advocates for it who will say, yeah, no, this thing's worth $1 jillion. All right, well, you want to buy mine for $1 jillion? No, but it's worth $1 jillion. What do you want me to do, man? And then there's the reverse. I can be the guy who's the advocate and said, this thing is brilliant. It's a rare work of transcendent genius. Why don't you Philistines know what it is? And I say it's worth, and you'll see these guys will put these things up on their shop for like 35 bucks, and it's like 35 bucks for that weird looking graffiti funny character thing from the 70s. It looks like it's still got, hash goo on it. Yeah, 35, that's a deal, Philistine. And it will sit there and get yellowier and yellowier year after year. And, I mean, the things get interested when the thing, takes, when it trades hands. What we're always looking for in comic base or any place else, ideally you're looking for what's called the market clearing price, right? It's the price at which somebody who has a thing will sell it to a guy who wants the thing, and it has to actually change hands for you to have gotten there. Now you can always like I've got a 4-bedroom house in Brentwood, California. I'll sell to you for $1. Yes, that will clear, absolutely, but it also would have cleared for hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of dollars more, to the line of people who are right behind that guy. So you want to ask enough people what they would pay for the whole thing to figure out the most that they would pay, but it has to be the most they would actually pay, not the most that's over what they would pay. That's not useful. I mean, again, you could post everything for for way too much money, but for I remember Conan for years and years and years in the Overstreet Price Guide. It's like Conan sold like gangbusters at every store I went to when they marked it off by a third. At which point it's like, oh hey, I guess I'll buy some Conans from you. But until that third off sale, they never moved, not a single one of them. The price was wrong for ages, but yeah, you're looking for the price at which it changes hands, not the price in which you keep it for another year or two when an interested buyer actually came along. All right, getting off the topic here, let's push on because I'm running out of time and honestly, I'm running out of steam. And we still have a bit more to get to. All right, so um, uh, when you get to the question of unique, right? So comic base only works when there's data, right? So if we have a comic book that no one has ever seen before, and we have to do this sometimes with things like theoretical, mint copies of the New York Times issue number 1. At that point, we have to say, pretty sure such a thing does not actually exist on this planet. But if one did, and you have to say, well, what would it be like? And you'd compare it to other historical documents of similar type from a certain era that would be of general interest to people and you'd say, oh, okay, it'd be somewhere in the neighborhood of blah, and you take a guess. Now, I don't like even our own guesses, based on the experience they've got. I always prefer when you start to see this start moving, but and they'll start moving when the market applies data to them. At least that's the way they work in comic base land. So I'm not even so worried if the initial guess is wrong, as long as there's enough market data to move it to where it needs to go. I worry when we guess so far off that it doesn't move for a while. That's when things like price corrections often get into play, because we have to say, well, this thing hasn't moved at all, and we have to ask ourselves why. Um, but when there's data, you can play. When the comic book or the item in general is absolutely unique, if there's nothing else like it in the world, you got to use your best guess. I mean, we have a lot of experience here at ComicBase, but honestly, if you've got something that there are no other copies of on the planet, take a shot. I mean, no one's telling you wrong. It's your book or it's your item. I mean, no one is in a great position to tell you, and unless we've got data to work with, we can't tell you. So we get the question a fair amount as to, hey, when are you guys going to support signature copies of stuff? And the answer is we're not ever. Because if I take any comic book on the planet, there's an infinite number of people who can sign it. They might have signed it nicely. They might have drawn a little picture. They might be an artist, writer, ink or whatever else, which is of no note to anyone whatsoever. Or it might be the last thing Stan Lee touched before he died. We have no way of adding any real value to this whole thing. We have nothing like the expertise, nor does anyone else. When you have something that's absolutely unique, best thing I do is, whatever you paid for it, well, there's at least somebody who believed it was worth that. So that's a good vote. Look around, but if no one else can give you a price on it, take your best guess at the whole thing and then hit that lock price button in ComicBase so that we don't even attempt to change it with the update. Because again, the more you can make something that's absolutely unique, especially when you take things like autographed items, things that have sketches on them, things that are completely customized, things like that. Yeah, it's just the whole thing of what we do here at ComicBase. It doesn't apply to those. There's one or two notable exceptions. There's things like the pay copy of Marvel Comics #1, which someone told me in a live stream that there were actually two of them, but as far as I know, there was only one. If there are two, then damn. Um, but where it literally there's an auction history for that exact comic, as it went by. That's a rare thing that we can do, and we certainly can't do it with things like again, all the ways you could ever customize an item. Now there's a countervailing game in the comic retailing world, which is, as much as I mean, there's a bit of a clash of philosophies in a way that much of the value that we add when we're dealing with buying and selling comic books is if we're helping to help people who are looking for Batman 468 or Hellblazer #43 or where else. We're looking for guys who have one to sell, to find guys who have one to buy, and for you guys to find a good price at which you guys can both do business. And then the people who have the thing and want, the people have the comic and want the money can get the money, and the people who have the money and want the comic and get the comic. At that point, we figured the whole world goes around, everything's good. There's another game though, of people who say, "I've got a lot of copies of Hellblazer #43." Matter of fact, I have all the copies of, Strawberry Shortcake #12, a comic that nobody except for 6-year-old girls ever cared about. But dang it, I feel something about these. At which point, the game though it goes is that you want to somehow convince the world that these copies are not just the most specialist things ever, but somehow your copies are unique. They're unlike all the other ones because these ones were personally, they're pedigree. They were in the collection of Joe, the not quite famous guy, or they were once they were once owned by this guy, or they were once scribbled on by that other guy, or whatever the deal is. There's a million different games that people will do to try to make an otherwise common comic book seem like a one of a kind thing. Sometimes they're legit, and sometimes they're not. But I'm going to say it works both ways on this one. Um, because the valuation of unique things is purely up to the buyer and the seller, and there's not a lot of expertise that can be brought to bear on them. Um, at that point, it really is how much do you want it when it comes to the buying and selling. And if it comes to sell, if you buy it and you want to sell it later, you got to find someone who want it just as badly as you did. Now, maybe that's an easy thing. Maybe you do have the first Tesla that rolled off the line, or something truly unique. You have the comic book that some guy was reading on the set of this particular movie, and was is as New York City was liquidated by the aliens, whatever the thing is. At that point, mazel tov, good luck to you and everything, and you might make an incredible amount of money at it. Or you might lose an incredible amount of money. But the point is, we can't help all that much in terms of developing its value. So great fortunes have been won this way. Great fortunes have been lost. So tread carefully. And also, personally, I'm a little sketch of people who take things that I know that they're really quite common. If I know there's a comic book that has 180,000 print run, and it was all during the era where people owned bags and boards. I think it's a pretty good bet that 140,000 of those things still exist, most in near mint. At which point, I'm not going to be super sympathetic to someone telling me, "Oh my goodness, this completely, almost rare, super unique copy of." Cable number one. I'm just not going to buy it. And the guy who's trying to tell me that, I tend to look a bit askance at in the future because I know he's willing to kind of use me. So, tread carefully. That being said, there are people who make great fortunes dealing in exactly those things. So, if we're just talking money, it can go either way. So, take it for what it's worth. All right, moving on. Tulips. And this is the last thing I got to say. I believe the year was 1693. The tulips, it was a plant, I guess they were imported through Turkey, but the Dutch traders of Amsterdam were suddenly ruling the world of commerce. And they, they like flowers. Someone figured out that, hey, this flower from Turkey can grow in our soil. And they started breeding tulips and said, yeah, yeah, these are quite nice. People come by and they say, hey, you traders, you seem like you're making a fair amount of money these days. And my goodness, your gardens look terrific. French people came along. My goodness, the French love their gardens. And they said, how do we get some of these tulips? And the tulip guy said, well, gosh, we it takes a long time to grow up a tulip, especially the bulbs. Um, and said, well, we're kind of sold out for this year. They only grow for a certain part of the year, and I can't really, I can't give you any more bulbs. But if you come back next year, I will give you, and this is one of the first instances of it, an option on the future of the bulb. So I'll sell you next year's bulb, for a certain price if you pay me now. And this was one of the first options markets that ever arrived. And there's so a lot of minutiae as to whether it truly was an option or a pre-order or whatever else. It gets very complicated when you get into it. One of the other things kind of interesting about it is one of the things that was making the bulbs, if you guys know about variants with everything, the Dutch, when they're getting into this, were essentially growing their own variants because it turns out there were, you get red tulips, blue tulips, purple tulips, etc. But you don't really crossbreed them. But apparently there was I think they called it color breaking virus, but there was a virus specific to tulips that would cause the colors to shift around, sometimes in really interesting ways. But then if you had a tulip that had that particular color of, the yellow with the blue stripe running through it, if you had the bulb for it, the bulb would reproduce. So once it had been essentially made into a variant of the basic blue tulip, the bulb, that one right there, you could then sell that one, and that was kind of unique. And so all the things I just said about unique things, being on your own, these absolutely, apply. Well, so why are we talking about tulips? Well, funny thing happened, and if you guys ever want to read a really interesting account of this one, a Scottish guy named Charles Mackay had a book called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. I think I got the title right. I got given this book a number of years ago by my wife. Now, there's some specifics in the whole thing that are probably a little fanciful. So, take all this with a decent grain of salt. That being said, in Amsterdam and quickly spreading to the outside financial trading community around it, there suddenly got to be around 1693 up to 1697 an incredible, and I do mean incredible, run up in the valuations of tulips. It seems like everything that was running through Amsterdam was suddenly people going absolutely mad trying to corner the market on different varieties, different breeds, things like that. New contract law was forged and broken all over the idea of whether you could enforce futures contracts on tulips if the market went up or down. And the market's 10 times what it was last year. Do I still have to sell them to them at the price I gave them last year? Yes, you do. And then later on, when things went badly, does the reverse apply? The answer was maybe. At its most insane amounts, there were people who, I think it was like a team of horses in good saddle, with a carriage and something else, were all sold for the price of a single one of these weird variant tulip bulbs. There's stories of 15 hectares of, like 15 acres of land, of good arable farmland being sold for the price of a single tulip bulb. One of the funnier stories, which again, probably this one's a little sus, but I'll tell the story anyways because it's a good story. Is that a sailor coming out of town was staying with a rich family? He just delivered a cargo, and he saw, a tulip, bulb laying on the, table, mistook it for an onion, sliced it up and ate it, saying it was quite delicious. And they later had to chase the guy down because, the thing he'd eaten, it was so impossibly expensive in terms of what he just guzzled down, for his food. Experts these days say, well, wait, tulip bulbs, none of the ones we've ever found actually tasted good, so maybe the story's made up. But that being said, they did have early stock market trading type records of these whole things, and it had a fantastic run up and crash, where, the run up, again, it's like a single tulip being worth acres of land, and when the crash happened, it was losses of 99.99%. When things fell back down to the end, and the madness for tulip bulbs had left people. So, why am I talking about tulips? Well, you guys probably have guessed. Uh, this applies to any number of collectible items in life. And I guess, whether it's tulips, pogs, beanie babies, cryptocurrencies of various stripes, um, certain types of real estate deals, you name it. There have been wildly speculative investments that were the coolest thing in the world until they weren't. Um, and at the end, they, you know if you're the last guy holding the futures contract on a set of these ones, or if you have the biggest collection ever of the thing nobody wants anymore, you're out. You've lost it all. So don't be that guy. I guess is what it comes down to. Look, this is the opposite side of the unique side of things. They literally are selling variants of tulips. The variants were getting hot. It actually brought up the market for the overall regular, things of tulips, because everyone wanted to be part of the tulip thing. Um, we've had times in the comic industry when that's applied to us, and we've had times when, like, man, I never want to see another comic book from the 1990s. It's like, only now are these things marketable again in any real way. So, um, take everything with a grain of salt. If you're in a position to ride some kind of whirlwind evaluation, you know what? Go for it. I mean, and this applies both to gradings and special editions and variant covers and everything else like that. If you think you know what you're doing, and you've got the market, and you've got a buyer, go ahead and go nuts. And again, great fortunes have been made this way. Um, I personally, and this is more a matter of inclination than anything else. I'm not even going to say it's wisdom. It's just how I tend to roll. I would rather buy and sell things and make a little money, but do the whole thing a lot of times. So I mean, it's very, I like the idea that comics, and like everything else, ought to have stock turns, right? You ought to be able to say, like, hey, we, the average numbers, the average stock turns in a comic store, by the way, at least an old fashioned one, are like point something. It's not even a full turn per year. In other words, the average of things that they would have in their back issues would last in their inventory for more than a year. That used to be the going rate. This is a good way to be completely bankrupt as a businessman, unless when you finally do sell that one, you may just bank off of it. And there are people who can run a business like that. I personally, it's too weird and risky to me. At least that's how it feels to me. If you prefer to run in those circles, then I'm not going to challenge how you make a living, man. As long as everyone's above board, and you're not swindling some little old lady over out of her Hulk 181s from Junior's collection, then hey, go for it. But in general, I try to not be the people holding on to the next Pog, the next Beanie Baby, and where else. And if the things you're selling, if you see them go up wildly, usually a good chance to get out is where I'm kind of at. One of my absolute heroes in the comic industry was a guy who had the booth behind me at Comic Con the year we introduced ComicBase. When we finally brought it out of demo and we were selling it at the show, we our plan at the time was, because we had a lot of comic books, we said, well, look, we'll show it how useful it is to organize a collection, because we'll have all the comic books that we would otherwise be selling just as comic book people, but we'll also have the software set up at the front of the whole thing. We'll show you how you'd be able to look up stuff, and how you can quickly manage the collection, how everything's all nicely handled. And that was our plan, just kind of demo the product by you in practical life, while still selling comic books and software at the same time. One and only show we ever tried doing that, because, man, lifting comic books is really hard. But the guys behind us had perfectly I mean, perfectly timed the market on Valiant comic books, which was just breaking at that point. And the people, once upon they were this the company that came out of nowhere. They were an indie darling that no one had ever heard of, other than they had some old time Marvel folks at the helm that gave them a little bit of cred. And the people who were early believers in it, these guys had to be the head of the class because they had case lots. I mean, cases of all the Valiant comic books you'd ever want. Harbinger #1, and things like that. I think Rye #1 was just starting to ship, which was the chromium plated absolute crash of the entire phenomena. But all the ones that like people were like, suddenly it went from being a $1.95 comic book to being $195 comic book, and you couldn't get it anywhere because no one had them. These guys had boxes of them still in the original. They'd never been opened. And what they did on the first day is they sold everything full retail. Okay, great, did that. But days 2 and 3 of the show, they opened up those boxes and they started discounting them. It was like 20% the first day, if memory recalls. And they had people wrapped around their booth like you couldn't believe. And anything they had left on the third day, they let that go for like 35% off. They left that show with wads and wads of $100 bills and no stock. They're my absolute heroes for market timing. I've never seen anything like it. They got out probably 3 months before the entire market for Valiant comics crashed utterly, where all those copies of Harbinger #1 that people were like saying, "Oh, I cannot believe I laid my hands on this for only $180." They were so proud that they'd managed to do that. Suddenly, that comic book became a $12 comic book a year later. It's actually come up back a little bit more, but it's like, and the later on issues like Unity and things like that, I mean, they were like $30, $40. Suddenly they're $2 if you could find anyone who wanted them. But man, I've never seen market timing like that. Guys, if you can, in the markets they call it catch a falling knife, financial on these things, if you can do it, God bless you. Most people can't. I would say in general, price it out, play fair, shoot to make. If you can sell everything you've got, making a little bit of money as you're doing it, that might be the win. But anyway, that's generally how I roll into these things. And I'm just going to say, Mazel Tov, God bless. All right, guys, that is about it. Oh, and some comments from people as we go here. Larry wants to remind everyone to hit the like before you go. And let's see here. Oh my goodness, there's so many comments here. I'm gonna have to catch up on some of these before we go here. Did everyone's chat dialect here? I guess there's some kind of problem in that one. Okay. Okay, so moving on. Okay, let's see. Ed says, "Hi, mistakenly added a PDF to a comic and ComicBase right now to show picture file, and it doesn't see the PDF. Yeah, if it's PDF, don't show the picture file, show the media file. You'll see that it's not that icon. If you dragged a piece of digital media next to it, that it looks like a little play button to the left of the picture, I believe." To the right, yeah, so the left of the picture, that will light up. But to see what media is attached to a comic book, like a digital comic or something like that, right click on the issue and say Show Media File. I'll show you where the media is attached. All right, and all right. Hey, streamers, I had a hide current comment. That's really cool. Our mod wants to remind everyone we have a dedicated thread in the CB message boards so people can request topics. Larry wants to remind everyone, please hit the like button before you go. And Oro points out that apparently Isaac Newton lost a fortune in tulips. Well, there you go. All right, guys, that's about it. Thank you all for showing, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.